Hi, friends. Welcome to Encouraged and Equipped. On this podcast, we introduce you to the women of Christ Chapel Bible Church.
We love being encouraged to live out our faith in Jesus by hearing the stories of women in our church community. We are so glad that you're here.
Hey listeners, it's Brooke back with you again, and today I have the pleasure of sitting here with Misty, and we are introing a conversation I got to have with a dear friend of mine, Taylor. And today we're going to be talking about, Taylor so graciously shared her story with me for you to listen to it, and my hope and prayer is that, as always, it's an encouragement to you and a blessing to you. And honestly, she shared some really humble and hard things, but it's a really encouraging listen, so I'm excited for you to hear it. Something, too, let's set the record straight. Being a young adult, let's call it what it is. And listener, I don't know if you're a young adult, and I don't know if you remember being a young adult, but it's tough. It's a tough gig if you can get it.
It absolutely is. And I am no longer a young adult, but I remember it incredibly clearly for whatever that's worth.
Yes.
Yeah. And kind of forget that I'm not.
Totally. And I think I've talked about this on here before, and so it's not a secret anymore. But I used to tell people that I'm a closeted perfectionist, which means I'm a perfectionist, which I did not know until way later. But I don't want you to know I am. So that means I operate under the assumption that I should be good at everything right away and shouldn't have to ask a ton of questions. And young adulthood is really all about learning things for the first time. And I think being a young adult, life is just hard for a stretch. This will make Kathy Harrelson giggle when she hears it. I remember a few years ago, I was in my mid-20s, and Kathy was hanging out with me because she loves me and had pity on me. And I was like, I think I'm just in a hard stretch. Like, my 20s are just, they're not going to be this hard the whole time. And Kathy goes, and just like giggled and was like,
in fact,
yeah, no, this is just life. This
Yeah.
is just life.
Yeah.
And what Taylor shares about on this episode is kind of some of her pivotal young adult years, and one season in particular that was really, really hard and marked by a lot of hardship and a lot of, quite frankly, suffering. But again, believe me when I say it really is an encouraging episode. I think I was encouraged by Taylor's resilience and faithfulness, and still am on this side of it. And I think something you'll hear us hone in on a lot in this episode is this idea that it's so easy to forget, even on a good day, but especially in hard seasons and seasons of trials. We use that word a lot in this episode, this idea of trials. It's easy to forget about God's character or even disbelieve what you've known to be true in the past.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you can relate to that.
I 100% can, and in a really odd way, although maybe it's not so odd, I find stories of people's hardship and how they walked through it, or even if they're still in the midst of it, but they've not given up, to be deeply encouraging, because somebody else's example of, hey, I either am or have walked through hard things and made it through the other side with God's grace, it 100% strengthens my spirit when I'm walking through hard things, to be able to remember from somebody else's example. They did it alongside the Lord. I can do this too. So, they're not always easy to hear, but they always are encouraging to me every last time, and kind of have these lasting dividends for me of strengthening my own spirit.
That is such a cool thought. Thank you for saying that, Misty. And listener, as you hear that, I think Misty nailed it and really set this episode up perfectly, so I'm not going to add anything to it. I will say, listener, I would challenge you as this episode begins and as you listen to it, whether you're in your car driving to and from places throughout your day, or you're sitting at home and listening, or around the house, as you listen, take the time and attention to listen to little nuggets in Taylor's story and think, oh, that was God's provision. Even if Taylor didn't see it at that time, or even if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have seen it that way. My encouragement and exercise to you, and a muscle to build in your day-to-day life and walk with Jesus, is always have eyes to see, what is the Lord doing to care for me, provide for me, and show me He is who He says He is. So listener, with that in mind, here's our conversation with Taylor Lange. Hey listeners, I'm here with a dear friend of mine, Taylor Lange, who is a self-proclaimed big fan of Encouraged and Equipped.
Huge.
So we brought you on strictly based on your fandom, not on your wisdom or your walk. No, I'm just kidding.
You didn't have a choice.
I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we are dear friends. We're dear friends. We've known each other a while. And because of that, you've been so sweet and kind and humble and let me into parts of your story and hearing how you even got to Fort Worth and to Christ Chapel and how the Lord has moved and worked in your life. And I told you this months ago, and I was like, I think our listeners need to hear that. I think you have some unique insight and wisdom just based on some things that the Lord has allowed you to walk through. And so thanks for sitting down and chatting with me today.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. Okay, so let's start where any good story does, at the beginning.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about how'd you get to Fort Worth / Christ Chapel. Let's start there.
Okay. Well, before I moved to Texas, I'd only been here about 5 times. So there was a lot of culture shock when I first moved here, but I was in California.
That'll do it.
Before, yep. Not a lot of people like to hear I came from California, but I kind of am like, well, I grew up in Maryland, so I a lot of context that people aren't asking for. But I had moved from Nashville to LA for a job, and during the pandemic, they shut down all of California, the world, but California was very you can't even go on the beach, and it was 3 blocks from me kind of thing. So I went out to La Quinta right by Palm Springs where my dad lives. If people don't know La Quinta, it is not the La Quinta Hotel.
Okay, because that's as close as I've gotten.
Yeah.
It's just the Express, you know what I'm saying?
It's not that. People ask, and I'm like, that's really kind and sweet of you to think that, but no.
Not your dad lives in a La Quinta.
No. It's actually, if you know festivals, it's where Coachella and Stagecoach is.
Oh, I'm so glad that that's the reference you made. That's
Yes.
really going to resonate with our listeners.
Also, if you watch The Bachelorette, if you're part of Bachelor Nation,
Okay, sure.
Claire's episode was at the La Quinta Resort, which is right down the street from where my dad lives.
You are just dropping bombs of references that I am totally tracking with.
So I lived there for just over 2 years.
Okay.
And it's very much a retirement area.
Okay.
I'm talking 50% of La Quinta is not in La Quinta during the summer.
Oh,
And
gosh.
yeah, so and
It's like
then
a college town, but opposite.
exactly, because the reason why people leave is the weather is like 118,
Oh my
but with no
gosh.
humidity. So it's different than Texas
Sure.
in the sense of it's a very dry heat.
Yeah.
But all that to say, I was pretty isolated, and during that time, working from home, I was working in a position in tech, and I did not realize it, but I totally became a workaholic. I think it was almost like toxic gratitude where I was so grateful to have a job, but there were no boundaries, like wake up, laptop in my lap, in bed, and then going to bed 12 a.m. still working. Like,
Oh my
not
gosh.
great.
Yeah.
And so basically, and we can get into my perfect storm season, but I did not realize that the brain and the gut are so intimately connected. And I
Yes.
started to have health issues. And it just kind of was like, okay, well, this is weird. I was dealing with it for a year, and then it got to a point where I had to take medical leave.
Oh, wow.
And during that time, I just had
Because
a
of like
moment.
physical health symptoms.
Yeah, like not to glorify what I was going through, but just to give
Sure.
an example
Yeah.
is I lost like a ton of weight, like 60 pounds
Oh
kind
my
of thing.
gosh.
And so I asked my mom to come out, and she was by my side for
Mm.
4 months straight. Praise God, because that was such a gift. I know a lot of parents can't do that. And the fact that she was able to be there for me was incredible. And during that time, it was like, okay, this has been a situation that was always meant to be temporary, being
Yeah.
in your 30s living with your dad.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I was between 2 places that are not the same at all. San Diego, California,
Yeah.
which I was like, I want to go there because it's perfect weather. And one of my teammates and her boyfriend at the time, they lived there, and I was born there.
Okay. Yep.
So it was like, okay, that's one option. And then the other one was Fort Worth. And most people in my life were like, Fort Worth, where? And I was like, Texas. So I ended up moving to Fort Worth March 2022.
Okay.
And yeah, that's how I got here. And when I first moved here, I really thought it was the worst idea because I had made a decision within 2 weeks,
Yeah.
signed a lease, and then was here. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be working from home if I ever get back to work. Because remember, I was on medical leave. I'm
Yeah,
living
that's
by
right.
myself.
Yeah.
And also, how do you make friends as an adult? Like, I grew up playing sports.
Yep.
So even in college, my 30 teammates were my like forced best friends.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it was tough and continued to be tough for a while.
Yeah. A long time.
And we can unpack that, but Christ Chapel was, I mean, a huge part of me really coming into my own and building my community. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about that and how the Lord has provided.
So sweet. Well, you're such a good storyteller. And that was a perfect setup. Something you referenced, and this is language you and I have used in our conversations off mic because we're friends. You use this language of, oh, that was like my perfect storm season.
Right.
And you kind of alluded to bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
And that's eventually what led you to get to here. But let's go backwards because I think we'll spend a lot of time in our conversation today and for the listener kind of camping out on, you're going to so graciously share a big part of your story with us. And we're going to use that to kind of unpack what does it look like to trust the Lord when you are just at the bottom of a well, really, to use that metaphor, and to be in a hard season and a season of hard in every way for an extended amount of time. And what did it look like for you to pursue Jesus and to pursue joy and to continue to? Because I think I was thinking and praying about this conversation, and I've watched I've walked with and dearly loved and still do a lot of people who have been in similar seasons to the one you're going to share about that have walked away from the Lord as a result of it. And that is heartbreaking for them. And I know for a fact there will be women listening to this episode that are in a season that I'm sure feels similar to the one you're going to share about. Yeah. And I think before we get into all of it, I just want to give an encouragement of, we love you. Your church loves you. We want to support you and wrap our arms around you and help your needs be met. And Jesus will do that infinitely more and better than any individual can. And I think there will be days and times where it does not logically make sense to choose obedience and to choose to ask for help. But that would be my encouragement. And I'm sure you would say the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully put.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your perfect storm season. You referenced a couple of things. You were, I believe, unemployed.
Well, so I was technically, I guess, unemployed because I was on medical leave.
That's right.
I'm
sorry.
currently unemployed right now, which we can get into.
Yes, we will. We're going to touch on that. I'm so sorry that I'm misremembering. Okay, so take me back.
Yeah.
So you were in Nashville. You went to college you went to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, so we're backing all the way up there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we might not camp out there for long, but you were in college. You were a college athlete.
Yep,
you
go
played,
Doors, anchor down.
You played lacrosse.
Blacks.
Which is impressive. Your California showing with lacrosse. But then, so you do that, you get a job out of college, living your life, community, friends, all the things. Yeah. How old were you when you moved to California and all of that started to unfold?
I was 29.
You were 29?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was 29, and I remember that because I was living in LA and I went back to Nashville for the first time since moving after living in Nashville for 10 years. Really never thinking I was going to leave. Like I was like, Lord, this is my happy place.
Yep.
Please never move me. And he was like, LOL, that's cute. Go to LA.
Yeah.
And I celebrated my 30th with family and friends in Nashville. And I just remember being like, I kind of see why I needed to move. There were so many people there that I love and I miss, and I would go back there in a heartbeat. But the growth and maturity that I think the Lord was nudging me towards in LA was something I don't think I would have been able to accomplish without moving from Nashville to LA, somewhere that, I mean, people will tell you if they have ever experienced moving to LA. It's a hard one to crack.
Yeah.
It's not warm and fuzzy like Fort Worth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, not many places are, in my opinion.
this is a special place.
So you went to LA for work.
Yes.
As like a result of, man, I feel like that's what God's going to have me do. This is my next step in my life.
Yeah.
You're 30. You're like, okay, this is my next career move.
Right.
Okay, so you go to LA, and that's where you were sharing workaholic.
Yeah.
That was a thing.
Yeah. I mean, really, in every sense, I feel like until my perfect storm season, I was a quote unquote workaholic or achiever in a way that wasn't trying to be anything but, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, achievement is good, but I was putting my worth in that, my identity in that. So first, growing up, it was good grades, and then it became sports because I want to be able to go to the college of my choice and get a scholarship. And then from there, it was like, I got to get a new shiny job. And so when I was in Nashville, I worked in the music industry for 5.5 years, and that was very cutthroat, but I loved it. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be an agent. And then that was a moment for me where the Lord kind of put it into perspective in a way of, this is what you want now, but is this what you want someday as a wife, as a mother? And the answer, unfortunately, became abundantly clear that it was a no. And I say unfortunate because that is all I saw. I was very laser focused on becoming an agent. And then when I moved out to LA, I switched industries from music to tech, and I worked at Meta. So the through line was business development, and people that don't know about that, it's essentially the business side when you're working in lockstep with an attorney. So
Okay.
I worked on a lot of Instagram and Facebook deals. And the thing that Meta would talk about is there's not work-life balance per se, but there's flexibility. And meaning, if you have a meeting at 7 a.m. and then you go about your day and then you want to go to your favorite workout class at 2 p.m., you can do that. But you have to get your job done. And I was in a mindset, I think it really had to do with internships in college, but then especially the music industry, that I wanted to be the first in the office and the last to leave. And I'm talking like 10:30, 11 at night.
Oh my gosh.
And I just don't think, to me, that was like, okay, this is what it takes.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it was healthy. So on accident, I developed a lot of not great boundaries when it came to work and life when I was in LA, for sure.
Yeah. What would you say some of the, I don't want to overuse this word, but the fruit or the result of those habits?
I think a lot of sacrifice of the wrong things. So sometimes, like, we would call our Bible study at my church in Hermosa Beach, just called Hope Chapel, incredible church. I would miss what they call home church or home group, which was our Bible study. I would miss it sometimes just to try to finish something that maybe necessarily wasn't a priority, but I wanted to be extra prepared.
Sure.
I also think that things that fell to the wayside were, I mean, truly growing up, working out, and all of that was a part of my life.
Yeah.
And then once I graduated, no one was telling me to get on the line and run or, do 6 a.m. lift or whatever. So I stopped working out for a while, and I really didn't know, I had to learn the hard way about how really working out is not always just about being in shape, but like the Lord created us to move.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a competitive thing. And so I also think the biggest thing that sacrificed was just my true understanding of my relationship with the Lord. I think in my mind, I made it feel like it had to be work-based. And that I had to achieve to be in a certain light with the Lord and like honor him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things where it was like, okay, Lord, I'm not going to talk to you for the next couple weeks until I finish this project, and then you'll be proud and we'll be good.
Yeah.
And then I'll go to church and I'll be more consistent. But right now, this is a busy season, so I'm going to be kind of MIA
Mm-hmm.
and not really realizing that a relationship with Jesus is like a minute by minute, constantly with you, can talk to him anytime you want kind of thing. I kind
Yeah.
of compartmentalized him in some ways.
Yeah. And hearing you say that, I, want to caution and encourage the listener of this episode is not, hey, don't do these things, do these things. Like there's no guilt or shame for you retroactively looking back on that season. You are very humbly, I think, articulating, oh, I'm about to share about a really hard stretch of my life, but I'm giving you context to how I got there.
100%.
And it's not to say do and don't. It's to say, oh yeah, God longs to do life with us and for us to draw near to him, and God made us to do that. And I think something we'll probably camp out on for a second is this idea that God made us holistically. And so doing those physically healthy things blesses us spiritually. Doing those spiritually healthy habits bless us, holistically as well. And so I think I would just want to encourage and caution a listener, if you're hearing this, of this is not heaping on, hey, you didn't do your quiet time and now we're talking about it. It's, draw near to the Lord because he has made himself available to you. And something you and I have talked about, Taylor, and something that I talk about a lot with women I spend time with and hang out with and get to do life with, is this idea of we were created in the image of God. And I think that's a multifaceted truth, that there's a lot of beauty and wisdom to be found in. One way I like to describe the implications of that and what it means to be made in the image of God means, because God is God and deserves and is worthy of worship, you were made to worship.
Yep.
And you were given free will. And so the way I think about it is, I was made with a God-shaped hole in me. And because I have free will, I can put whatever in that hole that I would like in my heart. Like I can fill it with my job, with a title, with a paycheck, with an accomplishment, with a relationship, with a number on a scale, like whatever. I can attempt to fill that hole. But the more I keep trying to shove the wrong thing into it, that hole that's just going to ache and cause angst and frustration and all of these things. But God will come and fill that hole as soon as I invite him to. And that's what you were designed to do, was to let the Lord fill that God-shaped hole in your identity and in your life. And then that has holistic implications of, because my identity is now here, because I'm pursuing Jesus in this way, all these other pieces are now falling into place. And that's not to say, your life would get better if you just had more faith or loved the Lord more. I think that's also a slippery slope that I think the church can fall into when we're walking with people in really hard and dark seasons. It's like, well, if you just believed more or drew near to the Lord, you'd be okay. And it's like, yes, drawing near to the Lord will bring peace that surpasses understanding, but also God created you holistically to have a holistic relationship with him and with other people. And so I think we're going to talk about that a lot.
Absolutely.
But I just wanted to give that context to the listener of, please don't hear us say, hey, do this and don't do this and your life will go well. Hear a sister in Christ, hear Taylor share, oh man, I got in a really hard and dark spot, and here's some things that retroactively by God's grace I can see that went unchecked. And now we're going to talk about how the Lord ministered to Taylor and how Taylor drew near to the Lord, and even how she continues to do that in the ups and downs of life now. And life on this side of heaven will be hard and exhausting, but not hopeless. And I think that's a really key thing too. And so again, I don't want to steal your thunder. I want to give that context. But does that make sense? Is that
absolutely?
Yeah.
I think to your point, for what I was describing, my heart posture is to how I was pouring myself into work. That's not always a negative thing.
Sure.
You guys at Encourage and Equip for the podcast even talked about, for one whole episode, how you can glorify the Lord through your work. But the reason why my heart wasn't in the right place is because I was so inward about what it was reflecting for me, and not trying to love others or be Christ-like.
Yeah.
Through what I was doing. It was just about, am I going to get an A++ kind
Sure.
of thing?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to take what starts as like an innocent, even healthy habit in our day to day and apply it to our relationship with the Lord. Of even how you articulated, okay, God, like it's busy season, so I'm going to go crush it. And then you'll have something to be proud of in me. So then I'll come back. And it's like, oh, no. That is the opposite of the gospel. The gospel is you don't bring anything, but Christ calls you to himself and lavishes grace and love on you. And that's your identity is I can't do anything to make the Lord love me more or less. I just get to be in relationship with him. Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, so you're working in California. Things are, you're doing well. You're successful. You have a good job. You're working hard. Tell me a little bit about how your body started to respond to those, let's call them unhealthy habits. Like,
so I would say overall, I don't get sick a ton. I don't really have headaches, stomach aches, and I like started to have stomach aches to the point where I would have to ask my boss, like, can I lay down for an hour or two? And I remember in the fall of 2021, my boss recommended you should go on medical leave. I can just tell that you're really getting worn down. You don't seem like your bright, bubbly self. Your work is still doing great, but it seems like you're off, and I want you to have the time and space to do it. And at that point, medical leave, I didn't even know what that meant. Like, truly in my mind, I was like, unless you have cancer or a major surgery, like, why would you ever take medical leave? Like, I'm still functioning.
And you're a young, healthy person. And
Yeah, exactly. And so, and the only other leave I had ever heard of was like bereavement leave or maternity, paternity leave. So I was like, no, I'm fine. And the next, I would say 4 months, it got to the point where I was hospitalized for a month. My gut was just really messed up. And at this point, I had lost quite a bit of weight. And I was working with a nutritionist. And I'll never forget, it was right after the holiday. And our plan was to go over some meal prepping plans just to really make sure I was leaning into foods that were being super gentle on my system. And I got on the Zoom and I said, Liz, I got to be honest. I'm not sleeping right now. I can't keep weight on. I'm getting to the point where I need you to tell me how to eat. And that was weird. I'm like, I'm 30 something asking my nutritionist how to eat. And she was so kind. And she's like, I think, and this was the first time that she probably said it before, but she was like, I feel like your nervous system is starting to give you major signs that whatever stressors you're dealing with, that it's too much. She's like, I really want you to, number one, prioritize rest. And she was like, I want you also to start leaning into your dad and anyone you're around to ask, can you help me eat and make food for me and that kind of stuff. So that was weird, but I truly needed it. I also was working with a therapist every week. And so that happened on a Monday. And then on a Wednesday, I woke up and I just sat there. Even when I was in a little bit of a funk, I could still like be bubbly and like energetic and all of that. And I just sat there and I said to my therapist, I just can't do it. I said, I'm mad at God. I am not sleeping. I'm not eating. I feel like a shell of a person. And I haven't been quote unquote happy or myself for about a year. I don't know what to do. And he was like, okay, talk to me. And I was like, and I sat there, what felt like 5 minutes was maybe 5 seconds. I was like, I need to stop working. He was like, okay. And so when we got off that Zoom, I chatted my boss, who incredible boss, saw me as a person.
That's sweet.
And said, hey, can you hop on a meeting with me in an hour? And the first thing I said is, I can't believe this is coming out of my mouth, but I need to take medical leave. And she goes, 100%. I'm so glad you're finally saying this. Do not touch work at all. I will delegate everything. Your job is by end of this week, so in the next 3 days, to be completely done with work on your medical leave by the end of day Friday.
Wow.
She goes, I don't care how much time you need, take it.
Mm.
And that was really wild to hear that from a boss. And I don't say all of this to glorify my little T trauma or struggles. I do want to make sure that I emphasize the reason why I'm breaking this down is because it is a part of my testimony now.
Yeah.
And it was really crazy for me. I thought I was doing all the right things, working with a nutritionist, working with a therapist, but it wasn't enough. And really from there on out, it was like the next day I could not get out of bed kind of thing. And that's when my mom came in town. And the thing that I'm so grateful for my mom about is she would make sure that we would still go to church on Sunday. A lot of times I didn't have the strength to like stand, so I'd just sit. But she really made it a point to make sure that I knew that this was not my story, that maybe I couldn't see it now, but there was going to be purpose behind pain. And I really do believe as Christians, as believers, that there is purpose behind pain. And sometimes we don't see it until later down the road. But for me, part of this perfect storm season has gifted me with so much. I would say the biggest thing it's gifted me is empathy. I think there's a really, really big difference between having sympathy, like, oh, that's really hard, I'm so sorry, but not really understand or have a true, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're going through that. I know it really stinks. Versus empathy, it's like you almost can feel the pain. And know that that is a serious thing and see that person and not be like, oh, I'm just gonna say I'll pray for you, but really walk alongside someone suffering. I feel like that has been something that's been a big gift for me. Looking back at what my perfect season has really provided me.
Yeah. I have so many questions. One, thank you so much for so delicately and humbly sharing that. I think there's so many. The reason why I wanted to have you on is in knowing you through Christ Chapel community and hearing your story and being your friend. I've seen you on the other side of this season that we're now referencing retroactively, and I see a lot of consistent joy and faith and trust in the Lord that, quite frankly, makes no logical sense. I think. And I, by God's grace, I know and love Jesus. So to me, it makes sense because I'm like, well, yeah, you trust the Lord. Like, of course you're not worried about this or that. But I think what a testimony and what a way to be salt and light to those looking into your life who don't know or walk with Jesus, of, man, your faith and trust and almost like how relaxed you are does not make sense.
Oh, it makes no sense. That's the thing. From the perfect storm season to now, and right, a side note to the listeners, I've been on unemployed for a year and a half, and talking about how so much of my identity was rooted in my job. I can't tell you, Brooke, this season, number one, the Lord has just provided me with, you're talking about nonsensical joy. He's also provided me so much peace. I've been able to see things in life that have nothing to do with work-based things, nothing to do with achievement, but just the little things being the big things.
Yeah.
Showing up for your people, making time for things that seem like it doesn't matter, but really when you look back, you're like, wow, that really matters. That's been huge for me because I will go back to work, whether I want to or not.
Totally.
And I am going to make sure that I have people holding me accountable to not go back down a slippery slope of just behaviors and patterns that I know can be, for me, not good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But when you do look back, How do you see the Lord's pursuit of you and his provision for you in that season?
Oh my goodness. I see him everywhere in that season. Um, I did not lose faith during my perfect storm season.
Mm,
Praise the Lord.
yeah.
I did not like the Lord for a very long time though.
Mm,
And what I mean is I was angry at him. The suffering, mental health wise, but the suffering physical wise was so deep, and I hope to never feel it again. But if I do, I know I can get through it again.
yeah.
But the thing that is so beautiful about that season that I don't know how I did it, but I did, is I continued to talk to the Lord. It was
Mm,
like, okay, Lord, I need to get out of bed. And I hated mornings. I hated them. I still do, but like
Yeah.
in the sense of,
You're an afternoon gal.
yeah, I'm a night owl, not an early morning girly. But
Yeah.
during the season, it was really hard for me to get out of bed. And I just remember being like, every step of this day, Lord, I cannot do without you.
Mm,
I don't know why you're putting me through this. And I know, looking back, it was very much I was being selfish in my posture of I want to be comfortable and I'm not.
dang. Yeah.
But the Lord was so unbelievably just gracious to me. And a big part of that is Christ Chapel.
Praise God for that.
Yeah.
I think, too, a theme I hear in your story and in all of those details and timelines, that was Jesus pursuing you. Something else I hear so many sweet truths in your story. And I think when you said a moment ago, you were like, I did not like the Lord. I think that might make some of our listeners shudder and almost be taken aback by hearing you say that. But that's honest. And I think that's what lament is. You hear that language in Scripture, and a lot of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, this idea of crying out to God about an injustice or a hurt. And the way I think about lament is saying things that are maybe that we know are not biblically true, but they're things that we feel and that you feel so safe in your relationship with Christ that you can be honest of, hey, what I know and what I believe is not lining up. And I think it's really easy in a season of suffering to let your feelings dictate your day to day. And I think to pursue joy, I think that pursuit of joy is this idea of, well, a pursuit is intentional, right? Like pursuit does not happen passively. Pursuit is active.
Right.
And to your point from earlier, joy is a decision and is something you choose and is an action.
Right.
It's a verb, and so to pursue joy is to say, for example, I think a theme I hear in your story is this, man, I feel this way, but I'm going to choose to believe X, and I'm going to choose to pursue the Lord and to sit before him and to be honest with him. And I think one way the enemy hits us in our suffering is I think suffering is uniquely isolating for a couple of reasons. I think one, we're all just self-centered enough to think, oh, I'm the only one with this experience, or
my gosh,
no one will care, or no one will be able to help. And I think I've seen in my own suffering, when I'm humble enough, and I hear this in your story, Taylor, just this humility of, no, I'm a young, healthy up to this point, well-employed adult who is living with my dad and being cared for by my mom. Like that is a dependence that I think people are afraid of, almost more afraid of that than they are the suffering that would make that necessary. And I think I want the listener I hope one of the takeaways is this idea of to pursue joy is not when things are going perfectly. Like a pursuit of joy is to choose it even when it doesn't make sense, and to have a radical dependence on the Lord and on his provision, whether that's through other people and having our needs met. And so I just hear this theme in your story of dependence on the Lord, honesty with the Lord, and really dependence on other people.
Right.
What do you feel like you learned in that season about how to be honest with the Lord and how to ask for help?
I think So, two sin buckets that I really struggle with are perfectionism and control.
Okay.
And during my perfect season, those were stripped away
Yeah.
completely. Like, I had zero perfectionism. Not that I ever did, but the
Right.
idea
Like
that
even the
I
illusion of
want
it was
that, or
now
the
gone.
illusion that I have it together, and then control, I was like, my life is in shambles right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was no denying that both were stripped away. And I would talk to the Lord about that. And I think during that season, I learned to just do that, to talk
Mm.
to the Lord, to not hold back, and know, Lord, I don't like how I feel this way towards you, but I pray that I have the eyes to see your truth, and I have the ability to take comfort in your control and know that you're perfect and that you are all knowing and I am not. And I
Yeah.
can't do this alone. Whatever I was doing before, it was not working. And what I'm doing right now is not working. So please lead me in your direction. And
Yeah.
as I started to rebuild my health and gain more strength, it was a beautiful opportunity to choose joy and to rewire my thinking as to just really the Lord's truths, and to start focusing on glorifying Him and not over indexing and worrying about this negative self talk that I thought was a motivating factor for me for so long. Like, I need to push a little bit harder to get a little bit better.
Yeah.
For what?
Yeah.
Really, I sit here and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
What does it matter? No, it really doesn't matter. I think it is beautiful to improve and grow, but I was doing it in an unhealthy manner. And during this perfect storm season, because of my support in my community, I was able to surround myself with people in community, new community and old, that pointed me to the truth.
What would you say people did in that season well that helped you pursue joy without dismissing or invalidating where you were at?
They listened, they showed up.
So when we talk about this pursuit of joy, I'm like, okay, what does that mean practically and pragmatically? Like, how would I explain that to someone
Right.
who has no context to scripture or to Christianity or the church? And I think to pursue joy is, I'm going to use another churchy phrase and then maybe I'll be able to walk my way out of it. But I think to pursue joy or any fruit of the Spirit is first and foremost to pursue Christ, is to long and ask for and move towards Him in a relationship with Him.
Yeah, I agree. And you know how we were talking about the pursuit of joy, like pursuit being an action. It's joy is something that you have to be intentional about. And I think for me, I really, when I was going through my healing, realized the way I talk internally and externally can really show if I have joy in my heart and in what I'm experiencing.
Practically speaking, I think to pursue joy means to have an eternal perspective.
Right.
Does that make sense? Can you tell me a little bit about what you have learned about that idea of having an eternal perspective? Because that's what I hear in what you're sharing. Those aren't the words you're using, but to talk about, oh yeah, when I go into work, I want to make much of Christ. Or when I am interacting with people at the grocery store, I want to leave them feeling seen, known, and loved. Like that is, I think, rooted in an eternal perspective. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So, eternal perspective, I think when a believer has the aha moment of the Lord is all that really matters, that belief and really feeling it to your core is the most comfy, cozy feeling in the world. Like, unless you're a believer and you have a relationship with Jesus, that type of weight lifted off your shoulders of this side of heaven isn't it. And my purpose is to glorify the Lord, it makes a lot of other things not so serious.
Yeah.
And then with that, you start to not take yourself so seriously. And through that, for me personally, I have learned to give myself so much more grace
Yeah.
and others grace.
Yeah.
So that perspective of thinking more eternally has really, really helped me and has been honestly such a big shift in my life.
Yeah.
Of how I look at people, situations, and myself.
Time flies when you're having fun. Maybe we'll close with this, and I would love
Okay.
to hear any other
Yeah.
final thoughts that you had from your study and time with the Lord and prep for this conversation. I think it's really easy in any season, but especially again in suffering, and life feels chaotic and you feel like you can't get a grip on anything and things are kind of slipping away from you almost. It's easy to, I think, question the Lord. I think it's easy. I think we all do it. I think it's easy to question the character of God. What characteristics have you seen of the Lord's, even in the most chaotic and hardest seasons of your life? How do you see the Lord, and how has that helped you navigate those things?
I've seen him as a safe place. Like when I think of resting in the Lord in all circumstances, I'm such a visual person. I intentionally picture me crawling into his lap
Yeah.
and just talking to him
Mm.
and having that safe space, whether what I'm feeling or thinking is right or wrong, that he knows me inside and out more than anyone. He
Mhm.
created me. And the ability to have a direct line to God is incredible.
Yeah.
The fact that, like, in the Old Testament, once a year, one priest gets to talk to the Lord. Like, as believers, we all get to talk to the Lord.
Isn't that wild?
It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So that is something that I constantly go back to is when I'm feeling scattered, when I'm feeling stressed, overwhelmed, I really try to pray and meditate of I'm not alone.
Yeah.
This is not a Taylor show. The Lord is my shepherd and he is with me and he is guiding me, he's protecting me regardless of how I feel. Regardless of but no, he is omnipresent.
Yeah.
And the thing in closing that I would love to say to anyone who feels like they're having a hard day or a hard year or moment is just to keep the faith, to lean into others that love you, to lean into others that will point you to the truth, and to keep in motion. It can be so hard when you don't feel like yourself to go from one thing to the next. Just keep moving.
Yeah.
It's not going to last forever. Even when you're in the middle of the storm and it feels like it will never end, it will not last forever.
Yeah. And praise God. My hope and prayer is that as listeners hear this conversation and hear that, you share about that hard season that God brought you in and through, I hope and pray that people here cling to the Lord and he will cling to you.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for that and grateful for you and grateful for the gift that it is to pursue joy. Listener, I hope that hearing Taylor share her story was as encouraging and humbling to you as it was for me. And Misty and I are back to kind of reflect on it and talk about some of our takeaways from it. And again, listener, in these outros, one of my goals personally is that this helps encourage and equip, not only be a resource to you, but a tool for you of, man, how can I work these conversations into my day-to-day life with people I'm doing life with for the sake of encouragement and accountability in my walk with Jesus, and even how to broach these types of conversations with people that you know and love and have favor with that do not know or walk with Jesus. And on that note, something that really struck me about how Taylor shared and a lot of what she said was this idea of just total dependence on and honesty with the Lord. I think I was so awestruck. The reason why I asked Taylor to come on in the first place was I've known her for a couple of years now, and to hear the depths of the hardship that she experienced in what she shared about, but to hear just how unwavering her faith was and has been and is, even in the midst of still looking for a job and still wrestling with what would the Lord have for me in this season. Her faith, I think, has truly grown in hardships, and not in that cliche way that we talk about sometimes, but in a true, genuine way before the Lord, where she has a ton of joy and a ton of, like that verse in James 1 talks about, that's a verse we referenced a lot in this conversation. James 1:2-3, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. I see it, and listener, I hope you heard it in Taylor's story, that she has had trials of various kinds that have produced in her a steadfastness. And I hope the same can be said of me.
It can, because I've seen that in your own life. And I think we can, hopefully all of us who have walked with the Lord for any length of time can say it to a certain extent, whether it's just a little bit of testing and a little bit of steadfastness, or a lot of testing and a lot of steadfastness. But I think one of the key things to that for me is that in that honesty with the Lord and dependence on the Lord, sometimes I feel like we can only depend on the Lord if we don't question our faith, question his goodness, question anything about him at all. And the truth is, you can both depend on him while being honest with him about, hey, I know you're good. I know what your word says is true, but I'm not really feeling it right this minute. And there's honesty in that, and then walking through that he didn't leave you in the midst of your honesty with him. He didn't show up for you any less. He didn't provide any less power for you. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that you can both be honest with the Lord about where you're struggling in your belief with him. I believe you, Lord, help my unbelief, and depend on him at the same time. And that's how you come out stronger, because you've struggled through even like almost a relational piece with the Lord between you and him.
That's so true. And I talk about this a ton, but this idea of, I think, in an effort to acknowledge that God is holy and reverent, and we should, sometimes I think, miscategorize our relationship with him, and we treat it so other than. And it's the same thing of, oh, my healthiest and deepest, richest friendships are with those that I've had those honest, hard conversations with. And the same is true of the Lord. And something that I was so struck by in listening to this episode and thinking about it after the fact about this conversation, and I hope and pray that this has a similar effect on the listeners, is this idea that, I think the church, the big C church, and Christians kind of get a bad rap sometimes, stereotypically, of being hypocritical and not fully forthcoming about the hardships of our faith. And I think, man, if we can be honest with the Lord about our doubt in him sometimes, and still go to him and be reverent and be submitted, but be honest. I think if we can be honest with the Lord, why can't we be honest with people in our day-to-day lives? And I think
and vice versa. Yeah. If we can be honest with people in our everyday life, why can't we be honest with the Lord?
And I think that radical honesty is really one of the key things that can set the church apart.
I love that. It reminds me of Jesus praying to the Father the night before he died. If you could, or if you will, not could, if you will, would you take this cup from me? Not my will, but yours be done. I mean, I think there was an honesty there. He wasn't sugarcoating his the hardship that he was going through in that moment, and that he knew he would face in the future, and yet perfect trust and fellowship and faithfulness there in the midst of something really hard.
Yeah, that's a sweet reminder. And listener, like I said, I really hope that this episode was that for you, a sweet reminder that you can and should depend on and trust the Lord, and depend on and trust your community. I hope that's your takeaway. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening. For more episodes, be sure to follow Encouraged and Equipped.